At one point in your journey in Fallout 4, you may have stumbled upon these caravan guards at Bunker Hill. They're having a conversation about a supposed creature they have seen and heard of off the Boston mainline harbor. Referred to as a ghoul whale by the guards, this creature is apparently a massive and horrendous monster that has been obliterated by radiation. It stalks the waters at night and hunts its prey, killing anything in its path, and strikes fear into every single seafaring creature. But if you actually go to the Boston Harbor in-game, you can't find anything even remotely similar to this description, with the only plausible thing being that the guards mistook a local submarine for some sort of monstrosity. However, if we go into the Fallout 4 game files, we can find assets for this supposed ghoul whale, and well, it's terrifying. In fact, in the Far Harbor DLC that was released for the game over a year after its initial release, we can see giant whale skeletons littering the coast of Far Harbor, suggesting that this creature is in fact not a myth. The truth is, the ghoul whale was likely cut out at some point in the development, and this is why we can never actually find it in-game. But based on multiple lines of dialogue and the actual game files themselves, it's quite obvious that at some point, Bethesda intended on having this colossus play a major part in some underwater adventure. A lot of people have probably gone through Pan Am's quest for reasons. And one part of the quest line actually takes you through a small underground cave in the Badlands. And it's a pretty cool section, especially because it's the only time in the game we really get to go in underground caves like this, barring the Pan Am ending as well. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that in the game's files, and with modding and console commands, it's actually possible to find a pretty extensive network of unfinished and unpolished underground sections right beneath Night City. These sections are dark, damp, and devoid of any content, but they are there, and they certainly seem like they were intended for something at some point. In fact, during some of the radio station's commentaries throughout the game, there's one moment where we hear rumors of corrupted corpo vampires living underground in extensive cave systems throughout Night City. This sounds absolutely absurd at first glance, but it gets extremely interesting when we look back to one of the earliest leaks of Cyberpunk 2077 by a previously disgruntled employee. The developer noted a lot of things about the game and its progress that at the time were hated in the community, but turned out to be true upon release. And most interestingly, he noted one big piece of cut content the game was originally intended to have was an underground network of sewers and caves that was home to an army of vampire-like creatures similar to the vampires in the Masquerade Bloodline series. When we put all this evidence together, it starts to become very clear that this network of unused tunnels for sure was originally intended to house something. And that something is most likely an army of corpo vampires that kidnap and kill people to harness their strength. It's a pretty out there theory, but based on what we know about Cyberpunk and weird theories, it would fit right in. Probably my favorite aspect of Subnautica is actually the environments. Stumbling into a new zone full of fantastical creatures and plant life never gets old, especially when it's something we've never seen before. From the Lost River to the lava zones and lakes to the grassy plateau, Subnautica is filled to the brim with many great locations like this. And while everyone that has played the games has a zone they think is best, there may actually be another hidden zone no one knows about. In early 2022, a small correction was made to the Subnautica wiki that mentioned a small area underneath the lava zone. There is an unidentified area below the inactive lava zone accessed by a small hole or drop-off. It extends from 1,300 to 1,600 meters in depth, and small holes and drop-offs extending down to about 1,700 meters. It looks like a completely barren version of the safe shallows with no flora or fauna. This update quickly caught traction amongst a very small group of Subnautica players on the subreddit, and they began to look for this entrance to a brave new zone. Sadly though, no one was able to find anything that actually led to a new area, but some players discovered that when looking at the interactive map more closely, there seemed to be two holes in the inactive lava zone that led to something other than the lava lakes. In fact, some players were able to even glitch through some of the game's terrain around these two conspicuous holes and discovered what looked like many unused assets and sounds, potentially for a large biome that was cut from the game at some point. We already know from developer interviews and discussions that there was a lot of cut content in the lava zones, including lava sinkholes, lava bridges, and collapsing spires. So could it be that there was a long-lost forgotten zone, even deeper in the inactive lava zone, that's hiding more secrets to this game? Prey is a game full of different powers, many ways to play, and a variety of locations to check out. But just because the game has a lot to offer, doesn't also mean there isn't a lot of fascinating lost or cut content that never made it into the game in the first place. For example, in the game's files we can actually find tons of references to a massive gun called the Cazivore. It would have been a talking gun that had a bloodthirsty yet polite demeanor, and fired multiple homing explosive discs that could fly around the map and find targets to discombobulate. After killing enemies, the gun would announce its own heroics, and we can even find many of these voice lines in the files to this day as placeholders.
Exiting slow wave sleep. No selector found. Framing new neural imprint. Imprint complete. Linking Cazivore hybrodic munition system to selector MU. Cazivore is awake.
On top of this too, the gun would have had an associated quest line, where at one point after killing too many enemies, the Cazivore would have asked the player to recycle itself in shame. After which you could either recycle it, fix it by installing an empathy override so it would kill again, or simply installing it into the core of a medical operator instead. It honestly sounds like it would have been an awesome quest in-game, but sadly it was cut midway through development due to the teams feeling like it didn't really add much to the story. Another example of this is the concept and the storyboard art we can see for players dual-wielding wrenches, which also was later determined to not be a worthwhile feature to work on. On the enemy's side, there were multiple ideas that were never used, like an etheric nightmare or cannibal typhons, which were supposedly mimics that would consume one another in order to create a greater phantom who was resistant to all damage types and had to be hit from behind. These cannibal typhons too were involved with cut neuromod content that would have given players the cannibal ability, which allowed them to eat typhon material or potentially even human corpses to regain health. Another interesting cut neuromod was called Smoke Form, which would have allowed players to transform into a black mist that could fly around the space station at breakneck speeds, but was cut because it just didn't fit the gameplay style well enough and was too OP, like say the fast-paced teleporting in the Dishonored series, but on steroids. Overall, Prey is a type of game that excels in large part because of all of the options and freedom it gives you, and all the unexpected ways you can use your powers and abilities. And I hope one day if a sequel is made to this underrated gem, these ideas can be pushed even further. Another interesting piece of cut content from Fallout 4 is the quest 20 Leagues Under the Sea. The quest is a play on the words referencing a book and movie series 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which would likely have the same premise, where the hero travels deep underwater to fight and slay a giant and mysterious squid monster. In fact, in the cut game files, we can even see an animation for this quest, which includes our favorite big whale buddy, the ghoul whale, swimming around in the background. But if we dig even more into this mystery, we start to find a lot of other peculiar references. Located at the bottom of the sea near Boston Harbor are many unused and weird buildings and assets that we never actually see in the main game. And on top of this, we can find even more weird unused assets in the game files, like textures for a giant squid, underwater vault door mesh and scaffolding, and even a fully functional and awesome harpoon gun. Even more damning though, at one point in Fallout's main story, Deacon can remark about a fantastical and crazy underwater city full of adventure, implying that he has been there before. So when putting all of this evidence together, it becomes quite clear that at some point in the development of Fallout 4, there were big plans for a massive underwater vault akin to the BioShock series, where we could have peered into the deep blue ocean from inside the vault and battled creatures like the ghoul whale and giant squids, all with new weapons and assets. It's sad that this idea never saw the day of light, because truly it would have been one of, if not the most interesting vault in the entire Fallout series, and shows just how much potential the world of Fallout has to create amazing and unique ideas. And by the way, for those of you wondering and who are particularly interested in this idea, there's actually some mods you can download that will recreate this Vault 120 and give you access to a new player home underwater, where you can experience at least some of what Bethesda had planned. As we all know, Cyberpunk was initially released in a less than ideal state, but some might not know about the 4 gigs that were cut from the game but are still in the files. These 4 gigs are actually being updated by CD Projekt Red to this day, and will likely be added in a future patch release, or at least with time. The first gig, and by far my favorite, and the most interesting, is Desperate Measures, and tells the story of Pedro, a corp and very proficient netrunner who is trying to take over an automated Zeta Tech transporter, so he enlists your help to get it done. But you see, that's not the intriguing part. Pedro is a good man. But as you talk to him more and notice he is sitting in a wheelchair, you ask and he confirms that he has ALS, which for those of you who don't know is one of the few diseases yet to be cured in the Cyberpunk universe. And as you can hear about on car radios from time to time, Pedro has found a black market dealer in the USSR that is willing to help him convert his mind into a new body for a fee, and Pedro needs to find the cash. The quest is super interesting because it touches on a lot of lore and backstory we don't hear about in the Cyberpunk universe. And it's a shame it's not in the base game as of recording this video. Next up, Concrete Cage Trap is about a man named Tiny Mike who's being chased down by Militech agents. He's hiding out in an abandoned apartment building, and after figuring out one of many ways inside, you have to help him sneak or shoot his way out. You get him out safely back to the car, and Regina thanks you for your time. It's a pretty cookie-cutter mission. The third gig, Hothead, tells the story of an NPC trapped by a Militech netrunner who has put a virus on their chip, allowing them to be traced constantly. You have to drive around the city defending your car from enemies while your assailant tries to get rid of the virus. Only thing is, no cars come to fight you, and nothing actually happens. And that's because this quest probably stopped development after shooting cars in Cyberpunk was potentially removed as a feature, and left in the game files only as a remnant for us to see to this day. And the final gig, Nasty Hangover, is a request from Rogue to break into a warehouse and find Carl Gangsky, who was out drunk and got kidnapped by some Kang Tao operators because he has a chip in his head housing super confidential corpo secrets. So you break in and steal the chip and bring it back to Carl and either watch him get taken out by the company operatives or help him to keep the chip. Another pretty straightforward and quick quest.